Hey, Dan.
Mr. Rob, how are you? Happy 2022.
Happy 2022. It's been way too long for Art of the Possible.
And we did take a nice break. And I think just for the listeners, we are kind of getting together to put the 2022 strategy together. I think we learned a lot from last year. I thought we had a lot of great guests. Couple shitty guests, but we won't say which one those are. But it was a lot of fun. I think we're going to put some structure to this, but we're going to start off with a great conversation today.
Absolutely. And today we have two of our friends and colleagues from Terazo, a systems integrator headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, just down the road from you and a little bit further down the road from me.
Wait, should I cut you off every time you say a technical word that I don't understand? Because I know we're going to wade a little deep into the technical side tonight, and
we only have until midnight until my recording overflows. So I wouldn't interrupt me every time you don't understand a word. I go back to my suggestion, go get a fidget toy. And when we start talking in multisyllabic words, just fidget with it.
I know. I do definitely feel some anxiety about this conversation.
It's okay. It's okay. It's totally
understandable. It's mostly about you being able to run this by yourself.
It's totally understandable. Don't feel self-conscious about it. Just power through it.
I will try. As long as you insert some personality into the conversation, then I think I'll be fine.
All right. Sounds good. So we are here. Are you finished with the interruptions? Because we're here with Miles and Mike from Terazo. So let's let them introduce themselves. Miles, would you be kind enough to start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Like Rob said, Miles Phillips. I work at Terazo in our channel partnership where we work with Twilio. I kind of mix Dan and Rob. I have both a technical and non-technical background. So Dan, today I'm going to try to jump over on the non-technical side and play with you today, and let Mike and Rob stay on the technical side.
You're going to play with the force on the white side, just like the kind of like the positive side. That's good. I appreciate that. And wait, you missed the most important fact. You are a huge Cubs fan, which is amazing.
Yes, I am a third generation Cubs fan.
Third generation. Awesome. All right, Mike.
Hey, I'm Mike Blakeney. I'm a senior solution architect over at Terazo. And so I most likely be more on the technical side, but can speak business if I'm put the pressure's put on me.
Awesome. So let's get the sort of 90-second commercial on Terazo. Why does business today need a Terazo, and what do you do?
So at Terazo, like you mentioned, we are a digital engineering firm that really helps companies on that holistic software journey. We think about from the strategic side for planning out, what do they need to build to accomplish their roadmap and their goals, through building out that software, and then helping companies run the software after it's built with DevOps, reliability engineering, etc. We're about 100-person strong company and growing like crazy.
So we'll just write that down, Dan. DevOps, reliability engineering. We'll get back to that after we hang up. I'll explain those big words to you. So that's actually pretty cool. But how many customers, where do you see the trend in people building their own software? Is it the classic digital first, or are we getting into mainstream?
I think we're seeing a lot more companies starting to build software these days than you traditionally saw in the past. With the invention of the great companies, CPaaS and platform services like Twilio, for example, companies are starting to find out that, they have to change to be competitive, that they don't get to just buy software on the shelf and have the exact customer experience that everyone else has. The world is changing. The world is becoming more digital, and companies are finding that they really have to adapt to that to survive. And it's not just, your technology companies or like your restaurants and service. It's all the way down to the legacy industries, down to like transportation and logistics, manufacturing. I mean, this change is really affecting, the world as a whole, regardless of your industry.
Dan, what do you think?
Well, we don't talk a lot about Twilio, but as my role at Twilio, when I look at my patch, it is literally a list of companies most people probably have never heard of, right? Which means that they are either the kind of they're not early adopters, right? They're either in the middle of the pack or even laggards. But they're the ones actually now that are ringing the phone and being like, wait a minute. Like, we hear, like, especially from a Twilio perspective, like we want communications integrated into our customer engagement. We want SMS, we want voice, we want all of these things. How the heck do we do that? And, honestly, that's where, like, as an old marketer and brand person, it'd be like, oh, hey, go buy, the latest thing from Salesforce or the latest thing from Adobe. But you get into these conversations and that's just not practical anymore, much less, like Miles said, it's just going to give you the same thing everyone else has. And, that's when I honestly pick up the phone and call Miles and be like, hey, Miles, we got to build something cool for this, distribution company or trucking company or, a company like that.
Awesome. But I think a lot of it has to do with where a company is. Miles, I think a lot of people we're seeing, they've been able to run their shop off of a spreadsheet, or the email's been good, or it's been okay for employees to use their own devices for business transactions, but they've gotten to a point where that's no longer scalable. That's no longer there's more regulations that they now have to come under, and so as a result, they've adopted all these desperate systems, and now they're asking the question, okay, how do I move to something that's going to help me scale, going to stay in compliance, going to help me grow my business, but not put a shock to it to where I have to shut down everything, right? Like an incremental steps to bringing all these pieces together.
One of our earlier episodes was the buy build thing. It's interesting to hear that you see these late majority or laggards coming on. I wonder, tell us about the conversations you guys have with customers when you're talking to a company and this is their first exposure to building. I think that is a threshold that is really important.
And I find it's, that's a really challenging conversation. That's a conversation that has to be done right, because, people who haven't bought programming service before, built software before, just copy the name of the show, they don't really understand this really is the art of the possible. So they come to you and say, okay, what is this product? What does the screen look like? What do all these different buttons do? And let me see a demonstration of what I'm getting. Sometimes it's a real big challenge to say, this isn't where you have to be. It isn't this is the set of features you get and everyone gets. You really get to imagine what this is, and that's really hard for some people to get.
Yeah. And I think, I think we lived so long off of SaaS, right? Like it was just there for so long. And then if you were, and then there was really, really, really expensive, like enterprise software, right? And software was just equals expensive in my perspective, right? And so the whole idea is you get on with some of these companies and you're like, well, let's build some software. And they're like, dude, you're just trying to like milk me for money. And like, that's crazy. We're not like, that's way too expensive. And you're like, no, it really isn't. And actually now you can kind of, because it's customer engagement software, you can run the ROI on how it's actually going to drive growth and actually be an investment that kind of, grows over time.
It's funny, Dan, I have a member on my team. We all know him, but, he came to us from more of the legacy space. And, whenever a company would come to him and say, oh, you're going to have to build the software, they'd say, okay, we're done with this conversation. It's too expensive. I'm moving on to the next thing. And there's a lot of that out there. Absolutely.
And I think that's the power of you all is like, I know I get into these conversations in my job and we're like, let's see a demo. And, usually a company expects you to, show your like Salesforce demo, right? Because it's software that's already been built. And you're like, okay, yeah, we can do a demo for you. But you got to answer all these questions. Then you got to give us like 2 weeks because we got to build the demo. right? And oh yeah, by the way, the demo we build is not going to be the software that you're then going to be able to take and do. You're going to have to then go do and build it yourself. And I think that's a really hard shift in mindset. And so Rob, I go back at you and Mike, just from the developer standpoint, like how do you kind of get people comfortable, with that idea, especially when they're maybe like me and an old marketer in the brand world, and you say, hey, we want to build some software for you.
Well, I want to ask I was thinking that very same thing. I want to ask Mike a question because owning software, let's say you're going to put it on the books. Would you put it as an asset or a liability, Mike? Bespoke software that you wrote for your company.
I think it'd fall under an asset. I mean, coming from I'm working technology, right? That's not a liability. That's an asset, right? That's a little bias.
It is. So this is how I think about it. It's definitely from an asset from, okay, if I capitalize the development hours, like that's the traditional sort of financial thing, and then you take depreciation on it. However, it wakes up in the middle of the night and screams. You got to wake up and, take care of it. That's what DevOps is about. Software knows what time it is, and so it likes to break after midnight and before 5 a.m. And so there are costs that are incurred after delivery. And it is the cost of doing business in the modern age. Every company is becoming a software company. And I think coming to terms with that notion, everybody's going to become a software company, even people that do, less than truckload shipping. They've got to have some custom software. And you don't just buy it and it runs in the corner like a toaster. It is more of an organism than it is a piece of machinery. And communicating all those things, like this is a strategic endeavor. This is not just let me upgrade my machines.
It has human resource costs to it now too, and a whole new set of expertise that you need to bring into the game. And I think that's what
and leadership expertise, because we started this little mini segment with buy or build. It takes some expertise to make that decision. And then
wait, time out. I'm a leader. I'm a C-suite guy. You guys freaked me out. Fuck it. I'm buying my software. Right. So now talk me off the ledge, right? Because first you said, hey, we got to build it. It's customizable and it's not as expensive anymore. Now Rob just pooped all over it. Right. So why would anybody really want to do this?
Miles, sell them.
Because there are advantages to doing this that can far outweigh the disadvantages, but it has to be done right. When you have that brand new customer experience that nobody else has, when you have this ground-changing new experience that just lets you start to leapfrog ahead of your other competitors, you've changed the paradigm. Now everyone else has to come around and innovate and come up with their own ideas to come up and play ball with you at the same level. And that's really impactful. And one of the things I know you guys talked about before in your podcast, but I can never iterate this enough, is you have to make smart decisions with what you build. You don't build your CRM. I mean, why would we do that? It doesn't gain a competitive advantage, but you do build that customer-facing thing, that wow moment, or that thing that lets you scale your manufacturing process, to 10x where it is. I mean, there are some really powerful software pieces to be built.
I think of what building software is like a craft, right? And the part of it is right sizing. There's going to be expenses to it, but you don't always need to have what the Facebooks and the Googles have to run your business. They're using tools that are built for a scale that you may not be at yet, right? And so I think one of the most important decisions when you're coming into these conversations is right sizing the build, right sizing in terms of the underlying infrastructure, right sizing in terms of the capabilities, What do you need? And for us, a lot of times we try and look for what's going to be the first quick win here. What's going to be the first piece that we can put out there that's small. It might be manual. It might be it might not be the shiniest thing out there, but you know what? It's going to be a first step in an incremental growth. It's going to be the first step towards the big thing, you know?
So do your customers appreciate that first journey for the learning experience as much as they should? Or is it really sort of like, oh, wow, look at that. We learned something, but they were really focused on the deliverable?
I think it depends on where an organization is. If they already have a structure where they have project management processes in place, it's more challenging because you're trying to introduce new ideas to an existing culture, right? And so there's a little bit more conversation and convincing that needs to be done. But if you walk into somewhere for an organization that hasn't really done a software project or hasn't really done a lot of larger projects, there's not a very rigid project management structure in place. Those customers tend to be more open to our recommendations, and I quite frankly think that's where we shine at Terazo. It could be as that valued partner. You know, we're just going to come in, build software, and walk away, right? It's we come along for that journey and build software that works for your business, that matches your process. Just because you're in the same industry.
So let me interrupt you there for a second, Mike. That sounds a little like a brochure. Like, we make software that helps your business. And I know, I believe you, but for the purposes of the audience, like, what does that mean? Because you and everyone says we're going to make software that matches your business. What does it really mean to do that with excellence?
I think with excellence, it starts, take a step back. You go buy off the shelf, you get boxed in, right? Whatever you buy is going to do that thing, you know?
Your business now has to do what the box does.
Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, a worldwide catastrophe happens, or the environment in which you're working in suddenly shifts. You're boxed in. You don't have the flexibility to come in and say, oh, wait, I got to change. So there's an advantage there in the fact that you can pivot more quickly than those who may have adopted that software as well, right? That's what I mean by we're going to build something that aligns with your process. You look at how you run your business, that value stream, right? What are the steps? What are the processes? And you build your software from that. I think what
if those value streams are broken? What if they are not suitable to survive this catastrophe?
What do you mean?
Well, I think there's a challenger sale sort of sub-story here, which is, that's cute. We could automate your 1990 process. However, it's 2022. So what's in my head is Starbucks a long time ago decided to build their own mobile ordering system. And they sell essentially the same coffee as Dunkin' Donuts. And yet I am a devotee of Starbucks. Their coffee's fine, but their ordering experience is state of the art. I pay with my QR code. I do my thing. I get my coffee, way better than a Dunkin' Donuts or Krispy Kreme experience. They couldn't have done that. And they couldn't have done that with an out-of-box solution for mobile POS. But more importantly, had they not done that, they probably would still be behind the curve in being behind on staffing, closing stores early, removing the in-store experience except for limited store hours. Like, they're still in business with lines going around the stores where their competitors can't even find the retail staff. I think together, companies like Twilio and Terazo owe our respective customers a real challenger sale, which is to say, these are the assumptions that you've made up until now. And here's what we see. Here's the opportunity. Here's the art of the possible. And we're not going to do the disservice of blindly automating the stuff that you currently do.
And so is it then fair to say, with what Mike, where you're going, and Rob, where you went, that when you come in at this point in our world, that when you're like, you know what, we're going to build some software, you basically just made a decision to change your business, right? Because it goes all the way back to, and Teresa and Rob, you already said it, like every company is now a software company. And so when you make the decision to finally build your own software and go down that road, you have changed your business, because you now have you have different human resource needs, you have different skills, you have different expertise, you have different cost line items, you have all of these different things. And it's going to start with, like Mike said, maybe in this small little part of the business, this little project, but if it works, it's going to grow, and it's going to grow and grow. And then software is going to eat your business, right? And then all of a sudden, Estes Express becomes EFW, which is a software business, and these kinds of things happen, right? Is that really what it is?
I think each individual company gets to choose how far they go down that journey. It's kind of funny,
but I don't mean to cut you off. Or is it Star Wars? And so once you choose this path, forever will it dominate your destiny?
I don't think it has to, because you have to look at the company and see how far they want to go. Dan, what you're talking about is this total transformation where I'm retooling my company. I'm hiring new people. I'm putting up new divisions of skill sets. And, for these companies starting in this journey, that might not be where they need to go, because there's companies like Terazo and other SIs in the world that bridge that gap a little bit. Yes, you're starting to build some new software, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going off and hiring a dev team. You're going to go off and hire like a DevOps team, a network infrastructure team, and do all these things. Software's evolved, but so has the cloud and the other technologies around this. I came from a data center company previously where we had a development staff of 20. And even then, even as recently as 7-10 years ago, we were saying we are not a software company. We're not going to get into building all of our own software. And think about that. We were a technology company. And we said, no, that's not where we're going to go. We're still going to buy some of our software. And all companies are still going to buy software. But because of, concepts of software integrators, DevOps and stuff, you can kind of choose how much of that consumes your business. You can buy that programming services, and then you can say, you know what? I don't want to be the one that's going to have to deal with this when this falls over at 3 a.m. I'm going to say, I have a budget line, say, I'm going to outsource the support for these services. And, your business can still run for the most part with the same staff, with the same plan, as long as you have the budget set aside to handle this chunk of your business.
So let me use a metaphor for that exact thing, because to me, going across this one-way threshold to I'm going to build a little bit of software gives you a whole new set of thought Legos. Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example for hosters. What hoster can distinguish themselves by using nothing but cPanel? Nobody. So there are thousands of people that will give you a virtual host to run WordPress and all this other canned software, and their interface is cPanel. And that's why they cost $27 a year. But if you want to be a serious data center company, you can't use off the shelf, in this case, open source software. You got to build it. And that's why when you go to Amazon Web Console, AWS Console, it's not cPanel. That's where they have all these amazing things, because a long time ago, they decided they're a software company. In fact, I have it. There's a quote from Bezos at a team meeting many, many years ago. He said, we're a software company, right? We make money when brown boxes appear on your porch. But our advantage is not the boxes. It's not the stuff in the boxes. It's not the trucks that move the boxes. It's the software that says Miles would like one of these next.
So I love this metaphor, but let's go to Starbucks, and actually let's go to ChickfilA. Okay. I know ChickfilA can be controversial for some folks, but if you, ChickfilA is an amazing example, actually, because I think they were slower on the curve than Starbucks, right? So what's fascinating about ChickfilA is that they have the longest wait times compared to their competitors, but they have the shortest time after order from when you order to get your food. Right. And they've actually run studies. People would much rather wait to order than wait for their food. Right. So you drive into a Starbucks and you drive into the drive-through line and they're ridiculous. I mean, they literally at times will have traffic cops guiding people and trying to figure it out, for traffic patterns. And so Chick-fil-A spends a ton of time figuring out how to optimize the drive-through. Right. And so now you don't even go up and have to roll down the window and lean out the window and scream into this box and not understand what the person says. There's a human being standing there with a handheld device taking your order, which I find absolutely amazing because no one gets to see the menu, right? There's no big board anymore. It's actually there, but it's nowhere near you because you're so far down the line, but then it streams, and that's how they've made it really, really fast. And so kind of to this point where, Chick-fil-A is not a software company. Is Chick-fil-A a software company, I guess is the question, but they still have to source the chicken, know how to make the chicken, their, my pleasure and kind of the courtesy that they kind of give and the whole culture that they have around a very welcoming environment is a huge part of that business and a huge part of that brand. So where does the real world in software in a business, I guess, combined, and where is that sweet spot? Because I think Starbucks found it. Amazing app, but still a really good third place and good with people. I think Chick-fil-A has found it. So maybe that's more the question of where does software meet reality?
I think it a lot of it is in that customer experience when you're talking about Starbucks and Chick-fil-A. Just to build on Chick-fil-A, I mean, you got the drive-through experience, but I can order from my home. And then it uses geofencing. So I take off, and while I'm on my way to the store or to the restaurant, it picks up that I am so far from the restaurant, throws my order in, and then detects when I arrive, it knows when I arrive at the restaurant, and then you punch in your little silo where you're parked at, and they come bring your food out. I mean, that was an amazing experience the first time I did that. I was like, I'll put the order in. And then I had no idea. We'll put your order in when you're closer. Your food, you get your food when it's warm. You get it when you show up. I mean, it was an amazing experience.
And what would have that taken literally just 5 years ago? It would
an incredible amount of code.
Yeah, or even you would have had to literally call Chick-fil-A.
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine calling Chick-fil-A? Could you put my chicken sandwich in and I'm going to be there, in I don't know, maybe 10, 20 minutes, depending on traffic. It would have literally been impossible for them to deliver that experience.
Yeah, I think that's to Mike said something that just tweaked me, an incredible amount of code. I think it still requires an incredible amount of code. It just requires very little Chick-fil-A specific code. And I think that's what is the manifestation of this continuous evolution. We'll look back 10 years from now and be like, if we had to redo Chick-fil-A circa 2022 in 2033, it could probably be done in an afternoon.
Can you imagine not having to 3D print your food? I mean, well,
exactly.
and that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
You're going to 3D print your Chick-fil-A.
This is Moore's Law for fried chicken, right? So it gets easier and easier and easier. And what we think is challenging is going to become space age, right? Did anybody remember Star Trek? Basically, Kirk had a cell phone, right? So
he had the StarTech. He had the Motorola StarTech
Razor. Absolutely. Absolutely. He was the first guy with the Razor. And I think that's the key thing. This is one of the reasons why people, once they start building their own software, are like, wow, this is a new leverage point on what was a tired business.
I have a question on that, but Miles, you're trying to hop in there. What were you going to say?
Yeah. I just thought I had a really funny, relevant story about this. I remember some of the code I was writing 20 years ago at my first programming job for a marketing company. I had to write my own software to do my charting. Like I wrote software, figured out all the math to do 3D bar charts for our marketing reports. I mean, can you imagine that today, Rob or Mike? Can you imagine writing all the images by hand, programming and computing all the angles you needed to make these 3D charts look good?
No, I'd give that to somebody else to do. I wouldn't do that.
No, but see, that's the thing.
There's somebody else that could do that.
There were startups valued at tens of millions of dollars that not just that did that, but actually just for financial companies.
Visualizing data. Visualizing data was huge.
Visualizing financial data created a $50 million private company. Yeah. And now you download D3JS and you're like, clickety click, click, done in about 7 minutes. And it's gorgeous.
So here's the question. I know probably and I can't, about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, definitely, there were the companies that actually were using too much software. Like it was just like the market wasn't there, right? They kind of were almost like too far out ahead. Like, does that exist anymore? Or have we literally reached the point in our society and culture where everyone's ready for it? There's nothing that's kind of like over-engineered or over-softwared.
I think there will always be over-engineered shit.
So give me an example. I guess I wanted an example, and I guess I probably should have set this out before.
My personal opinion, I'll give you one example. Anybody who is using blockchain for something that's not like real estate or financial. Like everyone's trying to do blockchain flower ordering. I mean, I get it, right? The VCs will love crypto and the ledger, but that's not an appropriate use.
That's a good one. That's a totally good one.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yep. Well, and I think also it's kind of the same line of thought, but like your infrastructure, you don't need to scale your business to host hundreds of billions of requests a second when you only need it for a couple thousand, right? And so that's what kind of goes back to, we see there's a tendency to look at what the large tech companies are using and say we need to do that too, and you don't take a step back and ask the question, why are they using that, and am I at that scale? Is what I'm trying to accomplish here is it what I'm trying to accomplish here less than what they're trying to do? And most of us don't operate at those scales, right? And so when we start talking about things like container management and being able to, I need this amazing here's a big word, Kubernetes cluster, right?
Get your fidget tool out, Dan.
Yeah, sorry, hold on. Can you spell that for me really slowly? No.
Not everybody needs to start off with something that's going to get you out to scale out to a million requests a second. Start out with the small stuff. Start off with something that's going to let you test your idea or just get it out there for your customers to use.
So let's pick on that for a second, Mike, because I think that's a really interesting notion. When you guys build, so there are a couple tools that let you build infrastructure as code. Let's just use Terraform as the example. Once you guys come up with the Terraform recipe,
I'm going to turn on ESPN. I'll be back.
All right. Tell me who's winning the game.
Okay, good.
Once you decide to build a Terraform Elastic cluster, Why would you not use?
You guys are just fucking making these words up. I'm sorry, I don't mean you are just fucking making these words up. So
I told you,
Terraform, Elastic Cluster, Kubernetics, Cybergenics. Are we going to talk about Scientology? Like, I'm just going to throw out words.
See, this is where it begins to get a little embarrassing for me with Dan as a colleague. I apologize to our listeners. He is more sophisticated than this usually. So seriously, Mike, so why would you not run that playbook and say, hey, this thing is elastic by design. And yes, when you first turn it on, it may have a whole one node, but it could scale. And that gives you DevOps leverage because then your DevOps team who's waking up at 3 a.m. has the same set of, red lights and green lights.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's an issue running the same playbook. It's where you start that at, right? And because there's always the cost we've talked about, there's always the cost of maintaining this thing. And that's going to come at a cost of getting people up in the middle of the night, having people available to address those issues. And then also the cost of just running the meter on those computes and on that storage. My opinion is, just start your infrastructure up where it's going to fit your needs now and maybe in the near future. A lot of these tools will still give you that scale.
Are you saying keep your instance count to match your load, or are you saying? Because let me suggest what I'm saying, then you correct me. Have a scalable architecture, but an instance count that is mated to your load.
It's some of that. It's also the right tool, right? Because there are some services like in Azure. You have Amazon Azure App Services, right? Mm-hmm. Getting up and going with something like that can be far less complicated than trying to write Terraform and setting up all the things you need to get set up within a cloud infrastructure to run Kubernetes. And so there's the complexity that can bring your timeline in, bring your cost in such a way that you can go out to the market with something that's going to scale with you while you're learning about what you're deploying and still give you the flexibility to pivot into your Kubernetes cluster. At the end of the day, it's from my perspective, at the end of the day, if you're running it in a container, the whole point of a container is just like a shipping container, right? I can put it over here, let this thing manage the containers. I can put it over here,
Dan,
let this
he's
thing
not
manage
actually talking the shipping containers that go on ships. This is not the container man.
Lots and lots of floppy disks.
I feel like Steve Carell's character in Anchorman right now. I'm like, ship, container, I love lamp. But keep going. Fascinating.
Okay, so we're definitely straining Dan. So I think I'm with you. There are some clever companies out there that for like $5,000 will give you an amazing set of Terraform recipes that create many of the standard architectures, particularly in AWS. And to look at those things build some crazy sophisticated, clusters is something. The marginal cost of it is zero.
All right, so let me try to wade in here, like real quick, with the layperson here. So what I hear and what we talk a lot about is like microservices, right? What I've always been really curious about, Rob, is we always say, hey, integrates SMS capabilities into your web and mobile apps with 2 lines of API code from Twilio, right? 2 lines of code. All right, but how many lines of code are behind those 2 lines of code? Like, how many lines of code did we write to allow like SMS to be sent from the internet onto the public phone network? And that's kind of where I think that's where it kind of all goes.
You brought in a ton of words there that each needs sort of spoken to. We ought to have a microservices episode after this one with this same crowd, because microservices is not what we're talking about. That's a different thing. Here's the reality. The code that Twilio wrote to take an invocation of our API and send it to the carrier is probably 3 pages.
Right.
The amount of software that we wrote to measure, quantify, assure, secure, and operate that 3 pages of codes is probably 3,000 pages of code. And that's the secret that people that are just getting into bespoke software have to learn. They think I'm buying a toaster. Actually, you're buying a toaster and all the shit that supports it. And you have to that's why you have to be very judicious about the software you build, because it has a very long tail on it. That tail is what shows up on the liability. You see the toaster, the custom piece of software, and you're like, hooray for me, I've got a great ordering system. Yeah, but did you know you need at least 3 people in your DevOps? And by the way, you probably need an Eastern European dev shop. I mean, there's like there's a long tail of it.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
Rob,
we need to get back to microservices, because I hear that word used for APIs interchangeably. And I think it'd be a great service to our listeners to say, no, APIs and microservices are not the same thing. You can have a lot of fat services behind an API.
Cool. Miles, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
I was just going to come back and, challenge you a little bit, Rob, because sometimes, yes, there can be this really long tail to software, but I think it comes back to the point that you and Mike are trying to make. You need to think about what you're doing and how far you're trying to go. Do you need to get this whole set of, Terraform modules and scripts so you can stand up this 5,000 piece complex infrastructure setup in Azure or AWS? Or can you use Azure App Services or AWS App Runner and ship a container to it?
So those are compressed versions of the long tail. But in order to take advantage of those compressed versions, you have to go spend 8 weeks learning what a container is and what Docker does. And it has its own set of illnesses, right? So Docker means you don't care about the operating system, but it means now you got to care about an orchestrator. So the devil will be paid. The taxes are due. What the form of them are. I think that the upside for many companies thinking about this are companies like you guys. Because you guys have a build and operate model, it's a radically easier way to get into this in a much less scary way, because I can just contract with you. But at some point, then you guys, either grow with that company or someone else says, okay, it eventually makes sense and it's economically better for me to bring it inside. But you guys are amortizing expertise on things like Kubernetes, where a newbie could not. Even if they went with app services or serverless and Lambda, what you've done is traded lines of software for size of brain.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's, but I just like the point where, companies today can start at that smaller spot. Companies 5 years ago couldn't. I mean, the tools just weren't there.
No, absolutely. And think about it. 15 years ago, you had to be a master Solaris system administrator to do anything. And now, how many people even know how to spell Linux anymore? The advent of AWS means, there are fewer and fewer Linux sysadmins. Mike?
Well, and that's exactly what's going on in AI and ML right now, right? You used to have a really big brain to do that. Now anybody with a credit card can get onto Amazon and run voice detection, run transcriptions. I mean, it's there.
Yes. And so that's this whole, like, in 2033, we could rewrite ChickfilA in 5 minutes. What took them, 3 years to write, because this tide is constantly rising.
Even in the last year, right? Amazon has released their own geo-fencing, geo-tracking APIs. So now that the magic of that journey of driving down and getting that push notification because of geo-fencing, and as a engineer, all the wonder behind the complexity right there, and now it's an API, right? And anybody can go and start using that and build a very similar, if not the exact same experience for their business.
So there's another
Rob. I'd say, Rob, one thing you talked about over engineering, what's going on. One area where I think we see a lot of this is, companies not taking the time to learn what all those tools are out there. And, because things are changing so fast, the big cloud providers, the Twilios of the world, Salesforce of the world, they're releasing so much capability that I bet there's millions of lines of code written every day that don't need to be written just because we're not aware of everything in the marketplace.
Well, I think that's why your customers need to trust you, because you are their Sherpa. If I can't trust Terazo or my primary SI, I'm toast.
Yeah, I chuckled the day, what was it, just recently, Twilio released scheduled SMS messages, right? How many companies out there, since SMS was introduced by Twilio, have written their own scheduling, and now everybody can do it?
I can tell you at Terraza, we've written it multiple times.
Yeah. Yep. That's why I chuckled. I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. I'm glad this is out there now.
Here's the travesty is that, let's say there are 3,000 instances of scheduled SMS. It will be decades before there are none of those still running. Don't mess with the scheduling server. Bob died 20 years ago and it's still running.
And this is another episode too, like get some, Brian Solis or some, like you guys or some futurists on here to talk about where are we going to be, not in 10 years, like where are we going to be in 5 years? Because the pace is so crazy. But then at the same time, like looking out our doors and our windows and turning on the TV and seeing what like the real world, right? Because I go to this amazing space in my head of like, wow, the world's amazing and we're gonna be able to do all this amazing stuff, right? But then I'm like, oh crap, then there's like the real world outside, and where is all this stuff, and why are we not benefiting off of it like the way we should? Or are we creating Terminator and like or Matrix?
No, that definitely is another episode, because what does it mean to have geolocation in the metaverse? Like, does it take me time? Wow. Does it take me time to get to ChickfilA in the metaverse, or do I just appear there?
Yeah.
All right, Dan. That's your outro. What sum this up for our lay listeners?
Dianetics. I love that. No, I think for, what I really learned kind of in this conversation was that, it's easy to say software is eating the world, right? It's easy to kind of like fall on these kind of what we found to be truisms, but the reality is that software is still helping us be human and advance the human endeavor. And like, I love it that there's, Mike's this amazing like software architect and all the rest. And when we asked him about, the power of like software, he's like, oh yeah, it makes the customer experience better. Like the human experience we have with a brand, like that's what it's really all about. And I think that's what's really powerful about software. And there's probably, there's 1,000 examples of where, software is a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It's like a knife. A knife can butter your bread or stick you in the gut. Famous quote from Desmond Tutu. God rest his soul. He passed away recently. But that's what I learned here is like, leveraging software to do things quicker, to do things faster, to do things better, as long as they're progressing the human endeavor.
Love it. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Miles. Hot respect for you guys in Twilio, where we love working with you guys, and can't wait to get back on and teach Dan about microservices. When we do that episode, we will make sure he does not have a fidget toy, so that he has to pay attention.
In Cybergenics, is that Kubernetes?
Kuber Cybergenics.
Kuber Cybergenics.
Well, it's got crypto and like hyper coldness, 0 Kelvin. It's we'll get to it.
Is that this upsell from P90X?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you all for listening to Art of the Possible. We will see you very soon.